Welcome to the IMCP Profiles and Partnership, the podcast that showcases how Microsoft partners and IMCP members boost their business by collaborating with other members and partners. I'm your co-host, Anthony Carano, and in each episode, I'll be talking to some of the most innovative and successful partners in the Microsoft ecosystem. The International Association of Microsoft Channel Partners, otherwise known as IAMCP, is a community of Microsoft partners who help each other grow and thrive. Members can find and connect with other partners locally and globally and access exclusive resources and opportunities. Whether you're looking for new customers, new markets, or new solutions, IMCP can help you achieve your goals. We'll hear their stories, learn from their experiences, and discover the best practices and strategies they use to increase customer loyalty and grow revenues. Whether you're a new partner or an established one, you'll find valuable insights and inspiration in this podcast. We hope you enjoy this podcast and find it useful and inspiring. If you do, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to follow us on social media and connect with us on our website, www.profilesandpartnership.com, where you can find more information, resources, and opportunities to partner for success. Thank you for listening, and now let's get started with today's episode. But before we dive into our interview, let me ask you a question. As a Microsoft partner and member of the IMCP, have you wondered about the process of selling your business? Well, if so, then stay tuned because we have a great show for you today where we delve into the dynamic world of Microsoft partner mergers and acquisitions. Today, we are thrilled to present an insightful conversation with two distinguished guests, Tim Mueller, managing partner and co-founder at IT ExchangeNet, and Ian Pavlik, who was the owner of Pavliks.com before successfully selling his company, who will share their unique perspectives and experiences in this evolving landscape. Our discussion will cover a range of topics from the current trends and challenges in the M&A market to the intricacies of deal activity and due diligence. We'll explore the motivations and timing behind pivotal decisions, the criteria for selecting the right buyer, and the critical factors for successful integration post-acquisition. Ian, who recently sold Pavliks.com, will provide firsthand account of the transition process, the role of M&A advisors, and its exciting new ventures. Pavliks was a technology company with over 50 employees and 230 customers. The company provided robust web portal solutions, Microsoft Dynamics implementation and customization, and managed IT services to public and private sector organizations globally. Its proprietary IP, Dynamics expertise, and a deep community roots allowed it to serve its customers both directly and through a network of resellers. Meanwhile, Tim will shed light on emerging technologies and market trends that are set to shape the future of the Microsoft partner ecosystem. IT ExchangeNet is a global M&A consultancy specializing in smaller mid-market mergers and acquisitions exclusively in the IT and digital marketing industries. The firm sells leading channel partners like Microsoft, Oracle, Salesforce, and ServiceNow, as well as MSPs, MSSPs, VARs, and digital marketing agencies. With an extensive buyer database of more than 90,000 IT and digital marketing decision makers, the firm sells IT businesses value under $30 million. So sit back and enjoy part one of this comprehensive guide to understanding the complexities and opportunities within the Microsoft Partner M&A world. And as always, stay tuned until the end to find out how you can connect with our guest and continue the conversation beyond the podcast. Let's hear what they have to say. All right, I'd like to welcome Ian and Tim to the podcast today. Thank you both for joining us. Really appreciate it. Let's start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Great. Glad to be here. Ian Pavlik. I'm the former owner and operator of Pavliks.com and the Portal Connector. Now I am happily semi-retired running a charity.
Tim Mueller, managing partner of IT ExchangeNet. And thank you again, guys, for letting us join the podcast today. Background is that spent 25 years as an owner-operator of 3 different technology companies. Had successful exits with those. So I've been a buyer and a seller. And now as managing partner of IT ExchangeNet, I'm a middleman. So we bring buyers and sellers together. And I've been doing that for just about 13 years of my career. And very gratifying to be able to unlock the value for a lot of these owner-operators that have spent a good part of their lives building their businesses. So that's a little bit about me.
Well, let's jump right in then, Tim. I mean, that's excellent. Why don't you share with us a little bit about what are some of the current trends and challenges in the Microsoft Partner M&A market that you guys are seeing?
There are probably more opportunities than there are challenges, mostly because there's a giant demand for Microsoft partners at this point. But as they look at the partners themselves, the buyers are trying to understand a number of things. One is, where do they stand with the new cloud partner program? There's been a lot of pivots by Microsoft, and the buyers are still trying to figure that out when they look and do due diligence on the sellers. And the sellers are trying to pivot as well to be something that is of greater value for themselves, but also for their clients. Another one is the Copilot AI initiative. So many things that we're reading right now about various partnerships that Microsoft has and the various iterations of Copilot, yet many of the partners still don't know what to do with it. They're not quite sure how to bring value to their customers. Therefore, it's hard for them to tell the buyers exactly where they stand in the Copilot ecosystem. It's getting more clear by the month, obviously, and the partners that are the ones that are probably the most seductive have someone that is dedicated to understand where the future may be for them when it comes to Copilot. Every one of our partners should at least be evaluating where their future stands with this AI tool platform as they become agents for it. But that's a big deal. Another part of it is just the greater understanding of Microsoft Dynamics. Dynamics seems to change at least every 18 months in some fashion. And a lot of the partners are still trying to figure out where their place is within that Microsoft Dynamics piece. And so if it's difficult for them, it's really hard for our buyers. But overall, the number of buyers out there that are asking us for more what we'll call targets for acquisition in the Microsoft ecosystem seemingly continues to increase by the year.
That's fantastic. And let me ask you this then. So, as a piggyback question to that, so I know you mentioned like three, evolutions, like with the technology around cloud, Copilot, and just with Microsoft Dynamics. How have these trends, aside from just around those three technologies, have there been any other trends that have evolved over the past years in the M&A market?
Yeah, well, private equity in general, they're sitting on about $1 trillion of dry powder. So that's money to be deployed. And that is their full-time job, is to find good businesses to deploy it and then help it get to a future exit 3, 5, 6 years down the road. So the money is out there on the private equity side. From the strategic side, so think businesses that are just like yours as a Microsoft practice, but bigger. Those are strategic buyers. And they have shareholders, boards of directors, and they don't accept the fact of each one of these businesses growing at 10, 12, 15% per annum, which is pretty much the standard for many practices. And the only way to address that shareholder pressure to grow revenue is by acquisitions. And so, because of that, you have both a kind of a perfect storm of a lot of money sitting out there from private equity to be deployed, and then shareholder pressure from the strategics are saying you must grow your revenue so that the accretive value, the long-term value of their business is higher. So we're seeing that as a couple things. The other part too is there's a strong demand from the buyers to the Microsoft partners to say, increase your recurring revenue. Because so many partners over the years have been kind of eat what you kill, project based. And to get the highest valuation, Azure helps them quite a bit now with more recurring revenue, is to increase that. And that is based on contracts that are either monthly, not as sexy, or yearly or multi-year, which is incredibly seductive for the buyers, because what that does is mitigates the risk when they're coming in to buy one of the partners.
Can I just jump in and sort of on that point? I think, and I'll get to sort of my story in a minute, but that recurring revenue element was something that Tim hit on early with us, and I was able to bring to light when talking to potential buyers, but also realize that it was an important part of our strategic initiatives back I want to say around 2012, 13, when we started to grow our recurring revenue. And I can't emphasize that enough, and agree with Tim that whatever partner is out there, focus on recurring revenue if you want to exit at some point. It just increases your multiple enormously.
Tim, I've got a question for you. You've talked about the maturation of the industry and the challenges that are switching to generative AI and partners adapting to the marketplace and the value that they provide their customers. Has that affected any of the deals that you've been working on in the Microsoft partner space? Has it increased or decreased the activity or the volume of compared to previous years?
That's a really great question, Rudy. And I would say that compared to, say, pre-COVID, it's a vastly different world right now, partially because has exploded with, open AI, and then you have, Gemini through Google and other tools. And really what they are right now is mostly large language model tools that help people. That wasn't necessarily a huge demand pre-COVID, because it wasn't, even though it's been around for 10 years in some form or fashion, it hasn't really hit kind of commercial status. Today, it does affect the way that the buyers look at our clients, to say, if you haven't figured out what your strategic initiative will be, at least are you thinking about it, and tell us your vision. And so, yeah, that is probably dissuade some buyers from moving forward with some of our clients if they at least didn't have some rudimentary knowledge or some kind of long-term strategy on how to best implement it.
Tim, thank you. That's fantastic to give us a sense of the general M&A landscape. I really appreciate that. So, Ian, now let's talk about you, because you had your business, Pavliks.com, with a successful liquidity event. Tell us a little bit about why you decided to sell, and what were some of the motivations there.
I started the business back in the mid 90s, and for probably 15 years or so, it was really a lifestyle business. It was a business that we, like Tim alluded to, we grew at an average 10-15% a year. It was a means for us to live a comfortable lifestyle, and wanted an exit at some point, but really didn't focus heavily on it. It wasn't until around 2010 when started to put a pin in the future and said, I want to exit at some point. In order to do that, the math has to work. And it was strategic decision, but it required a lot of conversation amongst the owners. I was a majority owner, but it was a family-based business. I had to talk to the family to say, this is what I want to do, and this is where I want to go. Are you on board or not? And so it required a lot of conversations over a number of years to get everybody pointed in the same direction to say, yes, if and when the opportunity presents, we'll pull the trigger. I think having to wait until there was an opportunity put on the table and then try to decide on, or do we want to exit, is probably fraught with problems. So we had those conversations early, but it was a decision that I wanted to do things in my life that weren't revolving around the business. And I realized in order for me to achieve those goals and desires, I needed to sell the business, and I needed that liquidity event that you talked about. So it was really a means to an end
Mm-hmm.
for me, but it required that those tough conversations with family, and just with the key family. It really wasn't something that I openly shared with the team to say that I want to exit someday, but I know that everybody knew at some point it was inevitable.
Now, I want to kind of go back to something you had mentioned earlier. So when Tim was talking about the general M&A landscape, and the conversation around the importance of increasing reoccurring revenue to drive up that multiple. Now, as our listeners know, as I shared in the opening, about Pavliks, that as a tech company with over 50 employees and 200 plus customers, that you guys provided. And correct me here, Ian, that robust web portal solutions, Microsoft Dynamics implementations and customizations, as well as managed IT services to public and private sector organizations globally.
Yeah, bang on,
That
exactly.
yeah, that was the business. Talk a little bit about because I want to keep that point. We said we really focused on on wanting to drive up recurring revenue, right, to increase the multiple at the exit. Can you talk a little bit about what was either maybe like some of the decisions that you made to do that, but also just some of the inflection points that are in the conversation with the family, to kind of shift that, right, that mindset, because I think a lot of our listeners in the community, they're out there building their business, and it's there's a lot of information out there that talks about, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to get to this number, etc. But I really want to hear what like going on in the mind of the family, right? And the nature of those conversations. Can you share some of that?
Sure. Yeah. I think it really comes down to realizing that when you have the goal of exiting and knowing that recurring revenue will help us achieve that end result quicker, the early on pain of moving to recurring revenue becomes an easier decision. You do these projects where you get the nice big bang, a hit of revenue, or you say, okay, I'm going to reduce that deal size initially by half or even 70%, but I get a recurring that's going to, forecast out 4 or 5 years. That's a hard one sometimes to initially accept on the cash flow side, because suddenly you see a bit of dip in your numbers, or you got your salespeople having to sell differently or explain things to your customers. Marketing's got to market differently. There was a whole number of conversations that we all had to be on the same page to operate the business differently. But it took a couple years. Again, I'm going back into sort of the late teens. Um, but it's like a snowball, right? As soon as it starts going, it becomes the easier way, and you start to get the salespeople being excited because now I get commission for the next 3 years, not just next month, and that starts to evolve. I think for us, then it became a strategic decision for each of my department heads to say, how can you convert some of your service work into recurring contracts, or find add-on partners or elements? Instead of pitching a $100,000 service project, it might be an $80,000 one where we also include some components that have recurring revenue in licensing or service or management or what have you. And that just took a bit of education and training. And but it was a strategic decision for us across all the different departments.
I've got like two more questions around this decision to sell. So I appreciate you kind of flowing with me on this, Ian. Now, what advice like would you give to other owners who, let's say, they're in a multiple ownership partner situation? The majority owners like, yeah, I want to look for a future exit, but maybe the other partners aren't on board. So what would be some things that these are maybe some advice you would give, questions to encourage them to ask, things to think about to help move that needle internally to get alignment around that type of an event?
I think it's open conversation, but it to say, hey, are you interested? What if? Have those what if conversations. But also, what worked for us was throwing out real scenario. And I would come to the table with our group of owners and say, okay, let's say we got an offer like this. This was the number and this was the situation. How would you feel about it? And then what that allowed was a real feeling of, whoa, no, hey, I couldn't. Yes, I could. What if we were to sell tomorrow and you had to leave 3 months later? What if we sold in 6 months and you got half of what you need, but you could stay on for 4 years? How would you feel about that? So we had those real scenario conversations, and it sparked up feelings of, I don't want someone to be my boss, or that's not enough. I don't know what is enough money for me, huh? And and that was actually a big one. What is enough? So if somebody is a minority shareholder and you get to decide definitively whether we're going to buy or sell, and they end up with enough of what they feel comfortable with, if it's something they feel comfortable for their share, then they're going to make the transition and the sale process a lot easier and smoother. But if you're pushing that rock up a hill and convincing them something that's not right for them, then it just makes the whole thing a bit harder.
So, Ian, you shared a lot of great, background information. Really appreciate your transparency with our audience. Were there any other like market conditions or circumstances that also played a role in this decision to sell?
Well, I think a big influence was COVID, to be honest. When COVID hit, and initially in those first few months, it was hard. It was really hard for us. Just the whole cash flow issue, and as any business owner, there's ups and downs and struggles, and that just was this sucks. But then but then we got a huge rebound, and in the couple areas of our business, everybody needed that service, and everybody needed that portal solution, and everybody wanted remote working, and we rebounded like crazy. And suddenly, inside of like 6 months, past what was probably one of the hardest cash flow scenarios, was suddenly we grew by like 40%, and now we're trying to deal with hiring and whatnot. So for us, that was a an interesting time to navigate. We came out of that year of big dip and big rise, and then I was wondering, so what are we worth now? What's the market going to pay for us? And that was really the burning question. I didn't fully understand what our multiple might be and how that might play out. And that was sort of the beginning of me thinking, okay, we're sitting at the highest revenue we've ever had. Now I wanted to know, if I were to go to market, what would the offer be? And that was when I started to do my research, and thankfully I came across Tim and IT ExchangeNet.
That's fantastic. That's really really great. And I know Rudy has, with his accounting background, has got several questions about some due diligence. So Rudy.
Yeah, you get to hear all this, Tim, because these questions are for you. This is my favorite background as a former auditor and having done a lot of due diligence and having uh, not only sold a couple of companies, but we bought 28 in the process. Due diligence. I drove everybody crazy with those two words, due diligence, because there's two sides to that story. So, can you tell us a little bit about what you focus on during the due diligence process and on these M&A deals, because that's so important on both sides. Can you tell us a little bit about what you focus on?
It is, Rudy. And I think first and foremost, it starts with preparation. We do an onboarding process with our clients, just like we did with Ian and his team, to give them a little bit of expectations of what's to come. One of my mentors, Mark Morgenstern, always says that expectations unarticulated is disappointment guaranteed. And so we wanted to make sure that they had expectations that it was going to be time consuming and it's going to be unending until the deal is closed and the money is transferred. And so the idea of being able to give our clients a really detailed list of the things that they will be asked for, whether it's operating agreements, shareholder agreements, it's employee records, customer records, things in that line, so that they can start populating a data room ahead of time, because many of the buyers will be looking to see what kind of finger do they have on the pulse of their business. And if simple data requests for due diligence takes weeks to get to, that tells the buyers a lot about the way that the business is run and the organization of it. And so it spans from not only the financial side of it, but all the way through to technology audits. And if in fact you do have like the portal platform solution that Pavlik had to sell, you really want to look and see, even down to the source code, how brittle or how strong the code is and how scalable it could be. Due diligence also comes in the form of something called the quality of earnings report, where most of the more sophisticated buyers will hire a third party and they will do a quality of earnings, otherwise known as a Q of A. A Q of E, I'm sorry, report that allows them to really do a forensic audit of the business and trail where all the money comes from, how it's categorized. In fact, does it reflect what was promoted by the seller during the beginnings of the conversations? And then, equally important is that how you best state your EBITDA and your adjusted EBITDA. And the adjustments are really just add backs that, in the simplest terms, you look at a buyer that says, all right, I know all the different expenses you had were fine with the IRS, all above board, but likely we're not going to pay for those after the transaction. So think, Yankees tickets, or running a company car through the business, or country club that you use to entertain clients. a lot of those expenses would not be assumed by the buyers. So those are considered add backs into your EBITDA. And that helps the seller quite a bit because most of the, much like with Pavlik, most of the offers are made on a multiple of your adjusted EBITDA. So if you do put add backs in to show what the future state of the business will be, that will help your transaction value.
Well, I want to drill down a little bit on a couple of things that you mentioned there, because these are things that, from personal experience, that bit me pretty hard in acquiring companies. Is how do you assess a company's technology and the value that that's going to bring to an organization? Because that's one of the challenges, in future integrations that take place. Then also taking a look at their customer base and how good that really is, especially from a recurring revenue standpoint, because you mentioned earlier on about the length of certain contracts, and because all these help you in market position, and just when you acquire someone, that's really challenging for the buyer to acquire and assimilate those companies, because there's a cultural component as well as a financial component. Can you share a little bit about how you assess those things?
Yeah, and having done a couple dozen transactions, Rudy, you know that you've both benefited and not benefited from that. And I'm sure if we turn the mic back over to you, you could tell some war stories of how those things have occurred. But I'll start with the second question first, and then go to technology. All customers are not, made equal. You know, Many of the different buyers are looking for customer concentration, meaning, do you have any one customer that represents more than, let's say, 15 or 20% of your total revenue? And if you do, that creates a great risk for the buyer for the obvious reasons. If you buy the company and that company, the client that represents 40% of your revenue is gone, now it's not the same company that you thought you bought. So customer concentration is one big issue that buyers look at when they're doing their due diligence. Secondly is the term of recurring revenue. While those two words are some of the most attractive words in our industry, they also mean things differently between buyers and sellers. Many of the sellers say, all right, recurring revenue, we've done business with these guys for 10 years. We can count on their business every year, but it's not backed up by any kind of contract. And so if the business is not contracted to do something over a year or 2 years, buyers will not necessarily categorize that as recurring revenue. And so that is a rude awakening for a lot of sellers when they get into that due diligence. And then lastly is that revenue something that is of strong margin? Revenue that is low margin work. You think in the past with VARs on selling computer equipment and how razor thin those margins have gotten over the years, versus something that is like a SaaS platform that has high recurring revenue because it's backed by a contract, but it's high margin because at a certain point you're just doing updates to it and it just kind of makes money. It produces money. So that's a little bit about the recurring revenue and the kind of due diligence that we see with the financial side. On the technology piece, one of the biggest questions that our buyers have is it scalable if we try to take that technology or some kind of process and drop it into our client base? Because many of the buyers, when they look at an acquisition, they not only say, what can that company do to bring a new service offering to our current service offering, but how can we cross-pollinate our services between each customer base? And so if a technology that has been developed doesn't have really the firepower or the muscle to be able to scale, then that due diligence piece of it is going to probably fail. There are some sophisticated buyers that do have their own, kind of forensics where they go in and they'll be, someone that looks a lot like Ian that sold his business or her business, and they're an expert in a certain area. And private equity firms or strategics may hire them to go in and just during that due diligence of the acquisition, as the expert in the room, really tire kick and stress test that technology to make sure that it is what has been purported.
Can I just maybe add something to that I think is relevant? When we were selling, and the portal connector was a piece of technology that was part of our offering, uh, we had a vision of what we thought its future looked like and how it could evolve and where the technology could go. And that was how we spoke about it and spoke to its value. In the end, the company that acquired us had a very different perspective on its value and has taken the technology in a slightly different direction. All very valid and very good, but just not the way that we were looking at it. So I think in hindsight, being open minded to how your technology that the buyer is potentially acquiring will be used is something that you need to consider.
Okay. Well, I'd like to follow up on that because I know when you're selling your company, it's like selling your baby, right? So it's yours. You built it. You put all your blood and sweat and tears and everything into building your company. And then, it's great to hear from Tim on the structured due diligence process because that's foreign to you the first time you sell a company. So what were the challenges that you may have run into during the due diligence process that really got to you? I know some of them are not easy and some of them take a lot of time. So what were the most challenging aspects of the due diligence process?
For me, I would say it was two things. First, say that what I think worked well for us was I had a very strong handle on, and I was big on numbers. I loved to manage the company by the numbers, and I had spreadsheets and reports and ways of tracking everything, which really helped during the due diligence process so that, I didn't have to go digging and creating certain forecasts and so forth because I kind of knew all that stuff right away. So that worked for me. Um, but it is uh, tough to open up and say, here's my customer list, the actual names of the customers. Here's the revenue by each one, because you want to go and explain, this is why this customer dipped last January. And this is why we lost this one, but got this. And so there's a story behind all of it. You can't always tell every story about every bit of data that is there. You have to hand it over in a way that hopefully informs the buyer enough that they understand it. So that was something I wanted to talk more about it than was really possible. And I'd say also a hard part was keeping that circle small during the due diligence part of who I brought into that circle to help pull the data together. So there were some people that could aid in it, but they weren't people that I felt comfortable at that point in the sale process to let them know the reason I need you to, or the reason I need this source code, the reason I need that report. Could you please give me a summary of what a more detailed forecast of this sales forecast for your customers? Well, why do you need that? You never asked for that before. Well, so those were some of the challenges that we faced, but the process that Tim led us through initially of the homework, saying, here's the data ahead of time that you have to prepare for. And I probably spent a good, I don't know, I say 6 to 8 weeks, about 50-60% of my time gathering that info ahead of time before the due diligence process started, so that it was there and I wasn't distracted trying to do the gathering of the data at the same time as all the other things that go along with meeting with potential buyers.
One thing I will add on that one is that we were lucky with Ian is that a far majority, I want to say 75% of the Microsoft partners who decide to sell don't have the ability or have not been able to build their business to have the time that Ian did to put into that. They don't have the infrastructure behind them or the team members to run the business. And so Ian did it perfectly, really. He did it so the fact that he became less significant by design
Yeah.
to the business, so that not only the exit would go smoothly and the buyer would not necessarily need him to stay on for 2 or 3 years, which wasn't his game plan, but also for the ability to answer the call when data was needed for due diligence. So I would say Ian's deal was a little bit atypical in that sense, because as listeners here from Microsoft partners hear him talk about that, I think they might get discouraged pretty quickly to say, gosh, I'm not sure I've got the time to do it because I'm still doing new business development or I'm still doing some execution or operations. So I just want to make sure that is clear as an anomaly more than anything.
And to that point, it was a decision probably 10 years prior to exiting that I knew that, and at the beginning, my name was in the title of the business. But strategically, I was trying to ensure that I was not what the customers wanted to speak to or talk to or interface with. I wasn't part of the sales process. I wasn't part of the service delivery. Sure, things were escalated to me if it required, but I worked hard at that because I knew that at some point, if I wanted to exit, I didn't want the buyer to require me to be around because I was some sort of pin that everything kind of went through. So, yeah.
Well, Ian, I will tell you, you're a lot smarter than I was during that process.
Just lucky, maybe. But it's a bit of an ego thing too, and I've got a lot of business partners. I was in some peer mentoring groups like Vistage or Tech up here in Canada, and there's a lot of people who and that goes back to the beginning. The business was a means to an end for me. It wasn't my reason, and it didn't deliver the core of what I wanted to do with my life. And for some people it is, and that's great, right? So I'm not knocking it. But if your identity is tied to the business, then it becomes far more difficult for you to become less involved, less important, because when the deal was done, I was no longer president and I wasn't key. And when I walked out that door, nobody called me. My phone stopped ringing. And you need to be okay with that. I know that sometimes some people aren't, and to each their own.
This wraps up part 1 in our interview with Tim and Ian. The first part of the podcast episode delves into the intricacies of the Microsoft Partner M&A market, highlighting the increasing demand for Microsoft partners driven by private equity and shareholder pressure. Key trends include the importance of recurring revenue, the impact of technology like Copilot AI, and the evolving landscape of Microsoft Dynamics. Ian shares his experience of successfully navigating the sale of his business, emphasizing the significance of preparing detailed financial and customer data for due diligence and the strategic shift towards recurring revenue. Tim adds insights into the due diligence process, stressing the necessity of scalability and low customer concentration for a successful transaction. Thank you for joining us today, and be on the lookout for part 2. In the meantime, don't forget to follow us on social media and connect with us on our website, www.iamcp.org, where you can find more information, resources, and opportunities to partner for success. One of the best ways to partner for success is to join IAMCP, a community of Microsoft partners who help each other grow and thrive. IMCP members can find and connect with other partners locally and globally and access exclusive resources and opportunities. Whether you're looking for new customers, new markets, or new solutions, IMCP can help you achieve your goals. To learn more, visit the IMCP website at www.iamcp.org.